Hello and welcome everyone to season 2 of Soul and Science, where psychology meets ancient wisdom. Our theme this month for season 2 is From Victim to Victor, the podcast where we explore the transformative journey of healing and personal empowerment. Through inspiring stories, insights, and practical tools, we'll guide you from a place of victimhood to victory, from unconscious patterns to conscious, empowered living. Whether you're navigating trauma, striving for personal growth, or simply looking for a deeper understanding of how to reclaim your power, this will give you an insight and a few tools to help you on that journey. Join me, Nyana, a psychotherapist, and Ardaas, a spiritual teacher, as we dive deeper into the connection of mind, body, soul, and its incredible ability to heal and rise and elevate. While this may not be a therapy session, and we invite you to seek professional advice where needed, this may allow you to get closer to understanding where you have been stuck in the past and how you can be reborn to be victorious. Hello and welcome everyone to season 2 of Soul and Science, where psychology meets ancient wisdom. Today, our topic for our season 2 second episode is the origins of trauma, the stories, the beliefs, and emotional wounds. I am Nyana, a psychologist, and I'm speaking to our very own yogi and spiritual teacher, Ardaas ji.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Nyana.
And together, we're taking you on this journey of understanding trauma, both from a psychology as well as a spiritual understanding, with the hope that we can move towards and through it together. So, we're going to talk about trauma a little bit more from where it originates and where it comes from, and the perspective of science today, because trauma is now the buzzword. Everyone is talking about trauma and its implications on the brain, on the physiology, the physical symptoms, and largely today on the physical and physiological manifestations of trauma, and far less, and still, I think some people are talking about the emotional impact it has on a human being, their psyche, personality development, and only now are we really fully understanding what early childhood trauma or trauma in general actually impacts people at Dasji. So I just wanted to understand from you how ancient wisdom or yogic sciences looks at trauma, because we did discuss trauma being an event that occurs either in childhood or in adulthood that has implications, and what may be traumatic to one person may not be traumatic to the other person, and yet it leaves a wound or a scar that has its effects on us as people. And I will go into it a little bit more from a psychology perspective, but just to bring out the a little bit more of the yogic understanding, if there is conversation around that.
Right. Thank you, Nyana. So, yes, I think to talk about trauma is inescapably directly linked to talking about karma. When we were talking in the last episode about how two twins may live the same experience and one be traumatized and another one will not, it's about the karma that we have. No, from the yogic perspective, the law of karma says that whatever we do is going to come back to us, and if it doesn't come back to us in this life, it will come back to us in another life. Meaning that when we come into this world, there is associated to our essence a certain number of what we call seeds that are is called seeds of karma that are either going to manifest or not. Nothing is guaranteed. But in a way, the soul chooses the family that is going to be born in. We say that this is not, sometimes this is very often said, you cannot choose your parents, you cannot choose your family. But actually, in yoga, we say completely the opposite, that our soul chooses the family, chooses the place where it's born, the location, the latitude and longitude in the planet, the actual place that is going to be born in that family with those kind of brothers and sisters and those parents, exactly because that's the ideal environment for us to grow, whatever that means. Yeah, and that growth will imply learning some lessons.
Mm.
And so when we talk about karma, generally we refer to karma as there is something to learn. There's something that we have. Again, through the law of karma, we initiated some sequence of actions. Every sequence has a consequence. So something is going to come back to us. Now, when it comes back to us, whether we um, react in a way that we create more karma or not is going to determine whether we get rid of that karma or not. So, for example, to make it clear, somebody comes to me and they do something nasty to me. Now, from the yogic perspective, it would be like, well, that is karma. That means that somewhere, who knows, maybe some many lifetimes ago, I did something nasty to someone. Maybe it was in this lifetime. But in any case, now it's coming back. Okay, so if that person is doing something nasty to me, and I feel, somebody with their aggression or whatever, I feel attacked and I feel wounded by that and harmed, and so I'm traumatized by the experience. Let's say, well, okay, whatever happened to me, how am I going to react to that? So if I react to that by hating the other, by fighting against the other, or by cowering in fear and then carrying it all within my heart all my lifetime, or taking it like, oh, I was punished, therefore I'm going to punish the world, and taking revenge on the world, I was abused, whatever, I'm going to abuse the world, things like that, then that's going to perpetuate the karma. That's going to continue the same karma. So you are creating more karma. Now, when something happens to you and you can approach it in a more neutral way and let it go, that is the way to not perpetuate the karma. So that seed of karma is completed and it's done. So if you don't complete the seed, if we don't complete the seed, that's when we found ourselves in situations which repeat again and again and again. Typical, a girl who separates from the boyfriend because has abusive language, or he doesn't respect her or whatever. And she, a few months later, finds a totally new boy, has nothing to do, is completely different. 2 months later, is exactly the same as the old one. No? So it's happening again. Why is this happening to me? Well, because there's something we can learn. And from the yogic perspective, we say that when we come to this world, just like the soul chose the family that we're going to be born into. And by the way, if the trauma occurs in the family, as unfortunately very often it happens due to maybe the parents or some family member that is close nearby, and then they create the situation that creates the trauma, we say, well, that's something that we can learn from. So the yogic perspective is not about blaming ourselves because if somebody's attacking me, it's because I attacked somebody else. It's not about blaming ourselves, but it's about, okay, how can I deal with this situation in the most elevated way? And maybe what we need to learn is to get courage and strength and empower ourselves, and to stop caring about what other people say about us, kind of lessons like that. And so through this traumatic experience that is happening, can I take a more, what we say, like a cosmic perspective, a wider perspective that is wider than this single little lifetime, but like a more wider perspective, and say, well, okay, this happened. I cannot change it. It's already happened. How can I deal with this? And what can I learn from this that I can let go of whatever karma has been stored that has created this situation? So I would say that the whole issue of trauma is intimately linked to karma and how to deal with karma in general.
So, if I were to say that I'm a child that's born into an abusive family, and that's something like a pattern that takes everywhere, because in psychology, we say that if we have, for example, an difficult relationship with our parents, you end up marrying a partner that's just like your parent to sort of resolve some kind of unmet need or something there, and so that repeats until I learn whatever it is that I need to learn, which is that I'm worthy enough, or I don't deserve to be abused, or my own self-worth, for example. And that significantly impacts the way we show up in life later on, right?
Correct. And if we learn,
Yeah.
when we learn that, then we don't need to repeat the experience, and we'll just stay away from partners like that. Yeah,
Right.
or if we take it out of the context of the family, for example, a child who suffers bullying, the maybe, I mean, we can recognize the children who are more vulnerable to that. And you can generally tell by the temperament and their personality, and they're generally timid, sensitive, caring, but maybe too much caring what the others feel or think, or in that way, there's like mm, a vulnerable. They become vulnerable, and when they are thrown into society, some children, by whatever their karma is, yeah, they detect your vulnerability, and they feel the need to attack you, right?
Yes.
To demonstrate power or to gain the approval of others because they are above, or whatever reason, right? So we would, in this situation, this is not a family thing, but you would say that the child has incarnated into this world already with this temperament. So even you can see it in twins, they have very different temperament, no? And the conditions around them is the same. The natural world around them is the same. Their family is the same. The food is the same. Everything is the same, and yet they have such different temperament. And we would say, well, that's because their essence is different, and that is that essence that comes with that sensitivity and caring and shyness for that kid is going to put him in a situation where he may be bullied. So in this situation, the kid needs to learn to, while holding the sensitivity, because sensitivity is a gift, right? It's not about getting out of it. And shyness is not wrong. There's nothing wrong with shyness as well either. But how can I allow myself to be who I am with those qualities, and yet not put myself in a position where I'm going to be vulnerable to these kind of abuses? So there is something to learn there. And there's yogic lessons as well that can accompany us, depending on what our situation is that created the trauma. But it all accounts to the same. There was some karma. The bullying had to happen. So the temperament of the child came in this way so that the bullying occurred. Now that it has occurred, because this is the point of our podcast, right? That after trauma, what can we do? Then the child who has gone through this, can they reflect upon what they could change to stay out of that situation in which they can be victim of that kind of thing, no? So there's always something that we can learn there.
Yeah.
Again, without making him guilty. It's because you are shy. It's because you are. It's not about that, right? But we can always learn something. We can always grow. It's not about, well, I've suffered through the trauma, and now I have to suffer feeling guilty because I did something wrong, because somebody did something to me. No, it's not that. Yeah, but we can always learn something to change in ourselves to move on.
I think that's a really important part of trauma that I'm going to pick on here, with no pun intended on the word pick on. But given that we're talking about bullying, and I think it's a topic that maybe I'm going to use as an example so that we don't go into family much, is that this there's a temperament that may lend itself to be vulnerable, sensitive, shy, that brings somebody in who may be having their own reason to pick on somebody who is, for them to show that they are more powerful, or whatever their story and dynamic of that child is. And then two things are happening here. One is the event, which is why we say trauma is not what happened to you, but what happens inside of you. And there are two things happening to this child who is getting bullied. One is um, the physiological response of trauma, right? That there is
Hmm.
almost an sense of terror that begins to occur in the body. That every time I see that person, or somebody bigger than me, or somebody that looks like that person, or if I'm being bullied in groups, every time I'm in a group, I begin to have that reaction of fear and terror unknowingly, because now my body has recorded it as an unconscious pattern of danger, and that I need to survive this situation. So we get patterned in with, and we get our neural pathways stuck in this pattern of, oh my God, I need to be afraid of certain kind of people, right? And
Yes.
then that terror that isn't expressed because the chances have probably gone and shut down, because my body's either gone into fight, flight, or freeze, which is the three physiological responses to danger. When the body perceives danger, the child either goes into flight, fight, or freeze, and then lends itself to be further, possibly. If I shut down and keep quiet, I may get picked on even more. If I'm fighting back, then there's another level of layers to this. But then my body is responding in that way, and it gets stuck in that pattern if it isn't fully healed and expressed and processed over time, because most of the times bullying goes on for days, months, and years, and children have to go back to the same school, to the same classroom with the same kids. And initially they're scared, and then later on something else happens to them, which is they shut down, which is they go into complete freeze, and that probably becomes their way of surviving in the world, which we will
Right.
come to both the physiological and psychological things about. But the second thing that also happens during that time is a narrative is created, or a story or a belief system that is created, which is being shy is being weak. I'm weak. I'm a victim. Everyone picks on me. The world is not a safe space. And those then
Nobody
become
loves me.
nobody loves me. Everyone laughs at me. Everyone's out to get
Yeah.
me. And when those stories and beliefs become my underlying sort of rule book or guidebook of how to exist in life, then
Mm.
I'm always living from a place of being scared, and then I'm repressing my gifts of sensitivity. I'm actually shutting down and saying it's bad to be that way,
Correct.
right? I'm rejecting and repressing parts of myself that are naturally me,
Hmm.
right? And that's something I'm noticing a lot with people who are coming in with bullying is, I'm weak, I cannot be that person. And I'm like, but that's inherently your essence that you're rejecting, and you're disconnecting from your essence. So if you're not going to show up as the real you, you're going to show up as a version of you that is actually fake and false. And you're so exhausted trying to wear that mask in society, right? And that becomes,
Yes.
and then the second thing is that leads further to your belief that I'm unlovable, I cannot show up as myself, world is too dangerous, and that's feeding your nervous system that's already in survival to say, I need to fight harder, I need to be stronger, I need to do this. And then I'm in a constant state of flight, fight, freeze, cortisol, cortisol, cortisol. And then I'm disconnected from my body itself, and I start living in the mind as a state of hypervigilance, which is what we're seeing is the impact in young adults with anxiety, excessive use of devices, depression, because everything we're doing is cutting, 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 survival, 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 survival. Um, and there's just a complete breakdown of the nervous system.
Yeah, totally. I would like to point two things. One is another way in which yoga helps a lot. The philosophy of yoga helps a lot is that we talk about the highest principles that we could aim for as human beings, and how when a human being incarnates those principles within themselves, you develop some virtues. And the if you can, if you follow the karmic path, right, this would be the dharmic path, developing the virtues. But if you go into the karmic path, they become vices or virus. And the line between a virtue and a vice, or a virtue and a virus, is really thin. So this is how, like you were saying, being shy and I identify as like being weak, and so I have to get away from that. But that's a partly an essence of you. And so in yogic philosophy, we understand how humility can easily turn into humiliation, right? Becoming small and humble, and then people take advantage of you. How you are simply innocent and you trust people, and they're telling you something, you innocently believe them, and then suddenly you are naive. So innocence is a virtue, naive is a virus or a vice. Humility is a virtue, but humiliation is a vice. And that's something that we do to ourselves. So we put ourselves into the humiliation spot. So this is where yogic philosophy helps, because yoga is not just the practice, it's not just the postures, there's also the philosophical component. And then there's something else I would like to point out as well, because on the other podcast we talked about how uh, a traumatic experience is not just something in which something happened to me, And I gave the example of the soldier who goes to the war, and they find themselves doing acts of horrible acts, killing and massacring other people, and then realizing, oh my God, what have I done? That was within me. I'm a monster, no? And trying to reconcile themselves with the idea of who they thought they were and what they realized that they in the kind of right circumstances or wrong circumstances, the thing that came out of me, that could be very traumatic. So I just would like to point out something I heard in a radio show. I think this is the podcast This American Life. It's a very famous podcast, and I remember a story of a young man, a soldier who had come back from the war. I don't know if it was like Afghanistan war or something, but he had been in war. And when he came back, he remembered some maybe some children, some niece or nephew, something they were asking him, "Did you kill somebody?" Because that's something that children often ask, when you go to war, "Have you killed many people?" And he said that when he was a child, he had been sexually abused by a family member, and he had a huge trauma on that. But he recognized that when they asked him whether he had killed someone, he felt inside him exactly the same, seeing himself killing somebody. He felt the same feeling as he felt when he had been abused when he was a child. So the trauma had the same signature physically, physiologically, no? Of one in which he was the receiver, and the other one in which he was doing something that he thought it was evil, killing, but then he found himself in a situation where he had to kill. So he killed, and then he was feeling so bad about what he had done as well, just like when he had suffered as a child. So the signature of the stress is the same. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about this cortisol. You mentioned the cortisol, but it would be interesting for people to recognize, because I believe not many people know. I mean, some people don't know that they are in stress. They,
Yeah.
they, they can recognize, this is how I am. This is how I am. I'm just difficult to fall asleep, or I just don't digest food very well, and they don't realize the connection to the stress response. And
Yeah.
so this would be interesting to recognize that actually there's some issue in me that I can deal with.
Yeah. So this word stress that you said that the person felt the same experience. So the body doesn't really cannot understand the difference of what is happening outside. It just knows what it receives, which is a sense of unsafety. Safety, unsafe, basic survival.
Right.
So when there is a form of abuse, if I felt like the survival was at risk, then it was about survival, right? And survival means in our animalistic brain, so we have three levels of brains as human beings. Our survival brain is like the instinctual brain of animals, but we have the intellect, the frontal lobe, which is what animals don't have, which is why we're considered to be elevated species. um, that allows us to make decisions, have empathy, and have the pause, and has more intuition than it has instinct. And so we have the ability to assess all of this stuff, which is the growth of the frontal brain. So I'm going to talk about stress and what you were saying in different ways, and that is that the body is wired for survival. Its only job after the second part of the brain, which is not the brain stem but the limbic system, which is also where it holds our emotion and memory center, and therefore everything is looked at from the lens of survival in a lot of ways. Only when it gets past that and moves to the frontal brain can we do something about processing it. So when we have things like trauma and stress, two things happen. One is that the body receives it as a signal for danger or not. And if I have been through abuse or any form of danger, including bullying or anything like that, is in childhood, then my nervous system is on hypervigilant or always looking at everything as danger, right? So if I have been bullied, then I'm always, okay, where am I going to get bullied? I'm always like on alert, which means that my body is always kicking what we call the sympathetic nervous system, that is really, that acts in fight. So we're ready to have a fight. So a lot of people are like, I felt that person attacked me. They didn't actually necessarily attack me. My perceptions become that. So I'm always ready for a fight. The second is flight, which is to leave a situation. So people who suddenly ghost or escape or things like that. And the third one is freeze, but that's the parasympathetic. Now, if I'm always working on the sympathetic, where I'm always looking to exit to fight or flight, my body is releasing something called cortisol. Now, cortisol is actually the stress hormone, and it's released with the intention in its optimum amount. It actually gives us great results. But there are three levels of stress, there is chronic, and then there is toxic stress, right? So toxic stress is something that happens for a period of extended period of time. Then my body gets wired to live only in sympathetic, always releasing cortisol. So I don't even know what rest and relaxation is. I'm always on the go. So many times we see clients who are shaking all the time, one leg shaking. We're not able to be in our natural homeostasis of stillness. By design, we're actually still. But if we haven't got
That's a really good clue. If you have more like this, you should tell us, because you see that so often, somebody with a leg tick, 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 tick,
yeah,
tick, 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 and you're like, what's happening there? No, yeah. So they are in this constant state of readiness for whatever has
readiness
to
to
happen. No,
escape if it gets too
yeah,
difficult, or I'm ready for a fight. I'm always
yeah,
ready. I'm always, hyper
yeah,
alert. And so I
yes.
can't stay still. I'm not present. I'm always looking for when do I need to leave? When's the next thing? When's the next thing? Am I going to be on time? There's always that. And then cortisol, when it comes to toxic stress, which is things that happen for an extended period of time. For example, if I'm living in an abusive marriage, versus acute or chronic stress that happens if there has been, for example, a tsunami or a natural disaster. It's a one event, versus prolonged exposure to toxic stress. What happens if you're young and you have toxic stress in childhood? It includes the impact of the way the prefrontal cortex or your brain actually gets wired. It may not be a healthy development of the frontal lobe. And so what happens that things like decision making, emotional regulation, your executive function actually gets affected. So I'm always like difficult making decisions, always confused, and you're wondering why can't you? Because what if this? What if that? What if this? What if that? Because this part of my brain hasn't really grown. It's hitting cortisol. Cortisol, sort of then its job is to protect my immune system, but it's actually protecting now for fight and flight. So then my immune system also gets not protected, and so we fall sick a lot more when we are in flight fight, living in chronic stress. So you'll see gut issues and all of those things that happen. But also it impacts my ability of my brain development if it happens in childhood. So you're seeing a lot more of ADHD and all of those sort of things that are showing up in the world today. People who cannot concentrate and therefore using gadgets as distractions so that their mind is able to concentrate,
Mm.
right? And cortisol in excessive eventually leads to illnesses like autoimmune conditions and things like that, because its job is actually protect the immune system, but the immune system now has to take care of itself, so it doesn't know when to stop. And over time, if there is an exposure, it starts attacking itself, and that's why we get autoimmune conditions, which
Right.
is another thing that we're seeing. And extended, again, there's chronic heart disease, diabetes, all of these things start happening because we're in a constant state of stress. Now, we always think that stress is hyper, but there is another form of stress which includes our parasympathetic, right? And that's where our rest, digest, and safety and connection comes from, which is our vagus nerve if it is in connection. And so these are all part of the vagus nerve and our autonomic nervous system. But the parasympathetic is when we go into complete freeze and shutdown. So what happens if I'm fighting and flighting, but it's not working? I eventually give up and I surrender. Say if I'm in an abusive marriage, I start just becoming compliant
Mm.
because I can't fight and flight. I just become part of this existence that's deadened and numbed, and I give up, and that's it. That's my existence. And that's when the parasympathetic kicks in, and that's the state I live in forever. I just keep on and, living from that state. And I'm never really coming into the state of actual rest and relaxation, which many people feel like I'm feeling shut down or I'm numb. That is the parasympathetic state. But
Right.
it's still,
It's good that you point this out, because sometimes we often think that the sympathetic is the activation and the parasympathetic is the relaxation, but not just that. No, when there is an abnormal, excessive activation of the parasympathetic, it could be this numbness and the shutting down, right?
Absolutely. And that is actually fairly dangerous because that's where depression and all of those other aspects come out because there's no motivation. I'm not able to pick myself out of this flattened state that has begun to occur, which is very different from the state of relaxation and connection in which I'm fully present, I'm in this body, I'm not still living in the mind and disconnected from the body. And when that occurs, the body is still releasing a certain amount of cortisol. It's still releasing adrenaline. And then your body, the only difference is that now it's in a sort of a flattened state. And then you'll find people like that saying, what is the meaning of life? What is the purpose? You'll see a sense of apathy that has stayed. There's emotional numbness. I don't feel anything. There's no joy in life. And all of these are stress and trauma responses. And all of
Yeah,
these,
we are not saying that everybody who feels lack of purpose is because they are under a lot of stress and having been traumatized. But if you have been traumatized, this could be one of the outcomes. Yeah, it goes in that direction, but not necessarily in the other, because
not
there could
necessary.
be many reasons for not feeling the purpose in life, for example.
Yeah. Um, Yes, absolutely. Not feeling or not connecting to the purpose of life is, however, still connected back to, I mean, we can go into existential crisis and what is the meaning and purpose of my existence,
Right.
um, which is questioning why I exist, right?
Right.
And then that may come from various factors and reasons, right? It could come
And
from,
it's just as important, and it's just as crucial in our lives that we find that purpose and will and motivation, but it's not only for the trauma aspect. I mean, it could happen for other reasons, but that could be something to explore as well. It's just as important.
absolutely. The in fact, it can be a deeply healing thing to actually find that meaning and purpose for whatever reason that you may
Right.
come to that and arrive at that question. But a lot of times, it may come through this journey of going through trauma, and then going into shutdown or being in and wondering what am I to do next, or being in so much fear of even doing anything and then wondering why am I not doing anything and what am I here for, and questions like that, which leads to its own level of stress.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a good point as well. No, not having a clear meaning of life and purpose and direction and where am I going, and seeing people around us that everybody seems so confident. At least that's how many people show themselves, especially in social media. And you feel like, what am I doing with my life? And that could be a great source of stress as well. Comparing ourselves to what we think others are in those aspects.
Absolutely. And all of those ultimately lead back to the same thing, which is I'm living from a state of stress, and I'm living from a state from a very highly activated nervous system that is fundamentally affecting my ability to feel safe in this world. And that why I didn't feel safe, which is our most basic requirement, safe and survival. It's like your root of existence, right? If my existence is at risk all the time because I don't know why I'm here, or someone's bullying me, or I'm in an abusive place, or something like that, then your nervous system is always being is always looking for that danger. It's always releasing cortisol, and then the long term effect of that is I'm emotionally numbing, or I'm doing using substances to change the effect that it's having on my nervous system, the stress response in my nervous system. And the important aspect of then beginning to heal the nervous system in order for it to recognize that I am safe in this world. I'm safe in who I am. If I've been bullied, then for example, it's not okay to be me, which is it's not okay to be shy. It's not okay to be vulnerable. Then
Right.
I'm disregarding. If I can't be me, then who do I need to be?
Right.
Right. And then the next layer of psychological complications is self rejection, self denial, self dislike. All of that starts kicking in, and that adds more stress. And now we are moving to levels of remaining in toxic stress at all times, cortisol being released at all times, and we living in flight, fight, or freed at all times versus homeostasis, which is our natural state where we're still safe, have the ability to be vulnerable with a certain amount of recognition that I am okay in the way I am.
So the way it sounds as I'm hearing you is a snowball effect,
Mm-hmm.
and it starts getting worse and worse at the very cause, the very symptoms are the cause now of creating even more stress. No, the symptoms of what's happened now become the cause. Now I worry about what is happening, and then I keep on going, and it's like a snowball effect in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
Let me just point out in this point that as desperate as it looks and as hopeless as it may sound, the road to recovery is also a snowball effect. So as soon as you start making changes to go in the other direction through maybe acts of courage, like the courage we were talking the other day of trusting enough to come to a therapy, for example, no? These also build up and create a snowball effect in the right direction, in what we say the dharmic direction,
Yeah.
and it gets increasingly better. You just have to change from going downhill to going the other direction, no? But
Yeah.
it's also like that. However bad you are feeling because of this snowball effect that is going in the wrong direction, there's some little things that you can start changing, and you start moving in the right direction for your life very quickly as well.
Yeah. So beautifully segue to talk about recovery, right? As you said
Right.
that it is this, and you can do little things. And what do you do? Because if I were to just say that in trauma, the base is that I start believing there's something wrong with me. I'm not good enough. I'm unworthy. Nobody likes me. Nobody loves me. And that is very dangerous for our survival. And it's recognizing these beliefs that the trauma of the event does not have to mean these things. This is where the beliefs and the stories and our narratives come.
Right.
And then start living from these beliefs and stories to be the truth. And I'm saying truth with inverted commas because there has to be a distinguish between what I have made this event mean about me and the truth that, you know, is it really true that these are that you are unlovable, or that there's something wrong with you, and then we build coping strategies and personalities and masks to cope with this core belief and core wound. So that's where our emotional wound is, that people are bullying because there's something wrong with me, that or this happened to me, my mom passed away because I'm a bad child, or I'm being punished and that's my karma. And I think karma
Yeah.
also can be misconstrued in that way, where it then becomes a very punishing story where I become incapable, powerless, hopeless, and helpless. Because I'm bad, I'm always going to have these bad things happen to me. And that becomes the emotional core wound and the beliefs. And I think all of therapy, and I know even at the yogic philosophy to a large extent, allows us to come into connection with our essence, that our essence is beyond these narratives, and that we can really truly meet our true self beyond these narratives. And therapy and all of these allow us to say, these beliefs are based on trauma stories or trauma. How else would you have control of what was happening? You had to say, okay, for this to never happen again to me, what do I need? This is happening because I have to be bad, so I have to always be good. And that becomes my journey in life, how to always be good so that never happens to me again, because I make it
Y-
mean something about me. And that's the journey, to really recognize those emotional wounds and beliefs and stories that I made it mean about me, and to able to look at myself from a place of neutrality as the true self, as the observer beyond these narratives, to reach the true essence with which I was born, to connect with that, and then to let myself see myself differently. And when I'm able to see myself differently, then I'm also able to heal my nervous system, or vice versa. So I know that when I began my yogic, you know, journey with Kundalini Yoga, healing my nervous system was such a big part of the healing journey. Because of the postures and because of the philosophy that I studied as well, it allowed me to see myself beyond these narratives of something wrong with me, I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy, these things happen to me because I'm a bad child, I have bad karma, and all of those things that add to more fear in our life and a loss of control completely over our present moment.
So let me ask from the psychological perspective if there is anything that that can help to rewire, reconfigure, and evolve that frontal cortex that you were mentioning, that it could get less developed in a child who goes through a traumatic experience. Is there any tools from psychology to help doing that?
So we do we understand the brain is neuroplastic. We do rewiring through things like narrative therapy, compassionate inquiry, but the actual work on the frontal lobe is largely work to do with meditation, mindfulness, um, exercises for the frontal brain, but they are less psychological and more somatic. And so, if I take yoga into that, then the healing of the frontal lobe is largely to bring awareness to it, to allow ourselves to do, to recognize, to concentrate its mindfulness. But these are not psychological tools,
Okay.
These are tools of ancient wisdom and sciences that we have integrated today into the psychology field to help people sort of come into stillness, and things like that. They're actually, yeah, that's the journey of soul and science, yeah.
Right, right, right. Yeah, I was wondering whether there was some things more specific from psychology regarding, I mean, the frontal cortex is about making decisions and things like that. I don't know. I was wondering whether there is some way to stimulate that aspect of yourself by making choices. Some, I don't know. I was just curious about whether the psychology has some direct approach to that. No.
So what we do is to say what happens to you when you're trying to make a choice. We go into the body, we see what shows up, what's the physiological response to that. Because making a choice can be dangerous for me if I was young and if I made a mistake and I got beaten for it, then making a choice can become very hard. Because I'm afraid of making a mistake now, and that may be
Mhm.
very unconscious, and therefore I'm always sort
Right.
of giving off the time to make the decision, right? Sometimes when we talk about complex post-traumatic stress, I can't escape my decision, and because when I was younger there was no escape for me, so now I'm afraid of being stuck in a situation. I always need an exit, so I won't make a choice and a decision. I'd rather be in the limbo, right? To recognize that these are actually very strong coping mechanisms, and I can't change a coping mechanism until I actually change the root of that, which is to go into the body, experience the fear, and change the narrative that if I make a mistake I'll get punished. And once the body,
I hear in this statement that you just did, the signature of the lack of commitment in our modern society, how difficult it is for people to commit because they are afraid of making bad choices.
yeah, yeah,
We are afraid. I shouldn't exclude myself. There
yes,
is
all
within
are.
all of us, right? This decision is gonna take, it's gonna have consequences. Like, and we know about karma as well. So even as a yogi, it's right. Watch out. What are you doing? Be careful, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And so we're so afraid of those consequences because when we were younger, consequences were really hard. Or we've understood karmic theory to be you have to face the consequences, and so karma comes and bites you in the backside. And we've made it about fear rather than the lessons to be learned, and that just brings up so much fear in me. And then the more I work with the fear, the more I become, the young child stops hijacking the situation, the more my nervous system heals, the less cortisol gets pushed, the more impact it has on my brain. But that's far slower than if we were to couple it with breath, meditation, yoga, and aspects that allow the growth of the expansion and healing of the frontal lobe.
Right, because again, a multi-layered approach is going to be more effective. No, if you work on the somatic, you work on the physiological, but also on the emotional, but also on the psychological, and even more on the spiritual, then it's going to be more effective. Even if we have a tendency to like more one thing or another of, even if I'm thinking yoga, some people like posture, some people like to meditate, but actually all the layers can complement each other to help us.
Yeah.
Okay, so going back to this concept of commitment and the difficulty to commit, because one thing we mentioned in yoga is that we call it like the 7 steps to heaven and 7 steps to hell, and there's, and I'm not thinking about figurative hell, but I mean it's like a metaphorically we live in hell. We can live in hell, especially when you have been through some trauma and you're experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder. It's like living a hell. Your life is like a hell, and this all these thoughts and beliefs. I don't, nobody loves me, and all these things that you were mentioning before, they are like living hell. Well, in yoga we say that to move from living in hell to move towards living in heaven or living in happiness and real happiness, not pleasure, but happiness. We made this kind of differentiation between pain and suffering and pleasure and pain. And so to move towards happiness, true happiness, that there is one thing we need to change. There's one thing that starts the transition, and that's the commitment.
Mm.
So it's interesting that the very one ingredient that we need to change from hell to heaven is commitment. And exactly, commitment is going to be especially difficult because of what's happening in the frontal cortex, right? All this thing that is damaging us. And as far as I understand, also like all these stress response, all this fight or flight mechanism that is in the core, all this part of the brain that you mentioned, when that part of the brain triggers, you may correct me if I say something crazy, but when that part of the brain triggers because we feel afraid for our lives, that disconnects the frontal cortex. So it kind of disables or inhibits, yeah,
Yeah.
a frontal cortex, meaning I cannot process it consciously. I cannot think about what's happening. I just react more in instinctive survival kind of way. And if that, like you were mentioning, situations which is like happening again and again for a long time, like the example you gave in a marriage where you are having a traumatic experience again and again and again with the other person, and then you end up numbing. That numbing will include also that frontal cortex that is the one that is capable of doing high decisions. So the problem is embedded within the situation. Like you are in hell. To get out, you need to commit, but you cannot commit because that part of your brain is being inhibited by the very thing that is putting you into hell. So yeah, it's a very tricky situation, and that's why we were mentioning the other day, just the very fact that somebody crosses through the door and comes into your consultation, for a therapy, that's already a big victory because they already committed to coming in some way. So that was the first step that was already kind of crossed, and that's amazing, no? The mechanism, how it happens.
Yeah.
So
And
from the yogi perspective, I will just elaborate a little bit more. This multi-layered approach it also happens within yoga. So the you were talking about how yes, we stress ourselves, but then we should also be able to relax, right? In nature, when we go through a stressful situation, rarely is sustained. You may encounter a lion in the wild, but it's been months or years since you encountered another one. So you can recover from one stressful situation to another. And so the body is designed to recover. And if we haven't done that, if we have been in an experience that we believe is a dangerous situation, a constant danger, that we are in constant danger, then the body never recovers. It's always in a constant state of fight or flight, right? So this is just one simple example how in yoga, when we are doing asanas, let's go to the physical aspect. When we are doing postures, we do some postures and then there's relaxation postures. And Sometimes we exchange them. So we do one and then another and another and another. So one activating the sympathetic nervous system, the other one the parasympathetic, and we combine them in such a way. And in any case, at the end of the class, there's always going to be a relaxation, what we call shavasana, yeah, the corpse pose. And so whatever activity we do is always balanced with relaxation. And I think a big deal of this is to learn to consciously activate ourselves, so stimulate ourselves into the stress response, because stress is not bad. We need to be able to do that as well, to activate. But then at the same time, as soon as the exercise is over, in 3 breaths, to be able to consciously activate the relaxation response. And then at the end of the class, fully relax in the relaxation, which is not sleeping. It's not sleeping, it's about a conscious relaxation. So this very little thing of yoga is already helping on the nervous system to rebalance itself through activity and relax, activity and relax. And that would be one example. There would be, I can think of many more of how that is operating on the physiological. And then there's other examples on the emotional and other ones on the brain, on the psychological, and so on,
Yeah, I'm
and
gonna
the
just take,
spiritual.
yeah, yeah. I'm gonna just take that forward a little bit because the body's natural state is to able to spontaneously respond to the needs of the situation. Sympathetic, parasympathetic window of tolerance, right? Which is our natural state of connection and viability. But when we go through trauma, it gets stuck in maybe flight fight, or it takes longer to come back into neutral state or homeostasis, what we call the window of tolerance, right? Where our prefrontal cortex comes back or our frontal lobe comes back. It usually takes about 20 minutes for that to happen. But sometimes people take days to come back,
Right.
months,
Yeah.
right? And at least for me, Kundalini Yoga really, really helped heal that. Where um, the flexibility of my nervous system and my vagal tone, the vagus nerve, sort of started to grow because with trauma it reduces the vagus tone, which impacts our emotional regulation. So then you're not reactive. You're able to create a pause between to have that conscious decision of how I want to respond, which comes back to karma, which is if you have a different response to a situation,
Mm.
otherwise it'll
Hmm.
keep showing up, right? But I need that pause. I need that prefrontal cortex to say, okay, 3 breaths and I need to get there. But if you've come from trauma that's not available, I'm going to keep recreating that trauma.
Right.
And I'm going to recreate the karma. And I am stuck in this pattern, right? And then we say, this is my karma, fate, I'm going to live it for the rest of my life. Where with Kundalini Yoga specifically, I've done other forms, and in this case, it was because of the intentional heightened sympathetic, parasympathetic into Shavasana, and then preparing the body to go into deep forms of meditation. It also helped, and maybe we can talk about it some other time, help me respond and look at a situation with flexibility, not an automatic instant response because I perceived danger when maybe there was none because my that was my trauma response in the past. But I was
Well,
able
that
to,
that flexibility is actually the capacity to choose what you
yeah.
do. So, and if you are meditating, and many of the forms of meditation are concentrating on the third eye, that's a very, very common and popular
Mhm.
one. Well, as you are concentrating in the third eye, you are stimulating the frontal cortex. So
Mm.
that's opening up to be able to having choice, therefore to be flexible. So it makes sense.
Yeah, and the trauma's biggest thing is that I become inflexible and rigid because I'm always afraid. And here I'm opening up the window of tolerance. I'm opening up the ability to trust myself to make that choice and stand behind the consequence. I'm choosing consciously.
Mm,
I'm not
right.
stuck in this pattern without the pause that says, wait a second. Is this my interpretation that there is danger here? Probably not. How do I choose to respond?
Yeah.
Is it going to be perfect all the time? No, we're human. We will react. That's not to say that we won't. But here, this thing of I don't feel in control, then you're finally reaching that space of I am in control because now I know how I want to respond. And now I'm in touch with myself, with who I am and who I choose to be in this moment.
But what are we in control of?
The response,
Our response.
our
Yeah.
response, our
We
response.
cannot, again, we cannot control the circumstances or whatever is happening around us or whatever somebody is telling us. We
Yeah.
can always be conscious of how we respond to that. Yeah. Are we going to react or are we going to respond consciously? And that's the key.
And that's the greatest choice. That's where you're changing karma. And I think that when I see people with a wired nervous system and trauma, they're trying to control everyone else in their circumstances so they don't feel a certain way.
Right.
And then I'm always powerless, right? Because I can't
Yeah.
change anyone else. I can't change the circumstances. So I'm continuing to stay in that state of fear that I'm going to be at risk. These emotions are never going to go. I'm always going to feel unsafe. And it's coming back into that capability and ability to choose the response, to walk away from a place if, or I'll speak to you later. Maybe I'm not in a space right now. Easier said than done. I'm not trying to say that, but that is the journey of healing, that there is the possibility of healing that nervous system, bringing in the flexibility and recognizing that I'm in control of my response.
Right. So I think we are in a great spot to give our suggestion for this week, our yogic,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yes. What
Uh,
would you recommend, Yogi Ji, for maybe the frontal lobe, or what would you suggest?
I think I would tackle this last point we are talking right now. I mean, we already mentioned last week about how deep breaths can help, and particularly making sure that the navel moves in the right direction when you are inhaling and exhaling. And if we are talking about being able to choose, the one thing that is associated with choice that is autonomous in the body is the breath, right? The breath is autonomous. It happens by itself, just like the stress response happens by itself. But if you can control the breath, if you wish, then consciously changing your breath is going to make you more available to change other patterns in yourself. So I would say just when you capture yourself, you catch yourself as feeling some of the symptoms of stress. Now, I'm not talking about trauma necessarily, but stress is the consequence of trauma. So we're going to go about the stress, going to go into stress. Then choosing to consciously breathe is going to have a tremendous impact. And there's a number of breaths that you can do. There's a number of different kind of breaths depending on what you need in the specific moments. The most basic will be 3 deep breaths that everybody talks about, and making sure that when you're doing this deep breath, the navel is moving. So navel out when you inhale, then the chest, then the clavicles, and then clavicles, then chest, and the navel. So this kind of breath from the bottom up and then top down, that's one full yogic breath, and 3 of them is going to help you to capture again your capacity to choose. But that was not the tip I would like to give today. I wanted to give another in relationship to this detecting the stress. Yeah, I mentioned when you detect that you are in stress, then you do these deep breaths. But how do you know when you're in stress? Sometimes we don't know. Sometimes we don't realize. It's like when, some people are like this with the shoulders. They know, can you lower the shoulder? Oh, yeah, I didn't realize, right? And we were holding all this stress. And so we talked a little bit about how stress affects the nervous system, and when we are fighting a lion, the body doesn't need to be digesting what you just ate. You need to run. So the digestive system is going to shut down. Your heart is going to pump faster so that it brings the nutrients that you need for the muscles to move and you can run. So there's going to be a higher heart rate and higher blood pressure. If you encounter some thorns along the way and you hurt your skin, you don't want to be my skin. No, a lion comes. So don't worry about the skin. So the body becomes insensitive. That's how we end up. If we hold a situation of stress for a long time, we end up numb. So numbness and poor digestion, lack of sleep, all these things which are symptoms of a stress that has been carried over for a long time. These are some of the things that we can observe. But there's another thing that I would like to point out. We show it in our faces. Our face is um, like a barometer of what's happening inside. And actually, it's a survival mechanism also for the species. Because if you see somebody with a very stressed out face, you are like, oh, maybe there's a lion, and I haven't seen it, but I see the other one with the face of the stress, then I know I have to get stressed out. So our face sometimes shows, well, our face always shows this stress unless you have an incredible amount of control of your face. And some actors and politicians and people like that learn to train to do that. But in general, our face is a manifestation of our emotional state. So a good approach from the yogic perspective is to be mindful of the face and conscious of the face. And if we detect tension in the face, and actually different areas of the face are going to reflect tension in different areas of the body, but that's a whole science, and well, I haven't studied that in detail, but it's fascinating. But just the fact that we can detect tension in the face would be a sign that we are going through. It could be emotional manifestation, like sadness is going to manifest in some way, surprise is in another way, fear is a different signature. So noticing those signs in the face can tell you that something emotional is happening, because we don't always have the awareness, especially as men, because men are less aware of what's happening within us. Yeah, we don't speak so much about the emotions, but we generally just express them out loud and sometimes with our face. So if we are yogis and we want to be mindful of what's happening within, and sometimes we don't have that awareness of the emotion that is happening, but we can be aware of what's happening with the face. So if noticing tension around the eyebrows, for example, that's worry. Tension around the upper lip, that could be disgust, or could be anger, could be manifest like when we are angry. So if you feel that there is some tension happening in the mouth, you can consciously, with those three conscious breaths that I just mentioned before, as you do the breath, right? Let's say we detect some tension when in a situation where we shouldn't need to be tense. We are with our partner, or we are with our boss, and with our children, or with somebody that is not a lion, and we are not in danger, but we have been accumulating stress in the relationship to that person. Okay, I'm with them, and I detect within my face some signs of tension. Okay, as I am detecting that, I didn't notice I was tense within, but my face is telling me that. So if I notice that my face is like that, I can do these long, deep breaths that I mentioned with the navel moving in the right way. And as I am exhaling, I am consciously trying to exhale out that tension and release whatever tension has accumulated in the face. Now, I'm not saying that tension is bad. There is the right way of use of tension as well. Tension is important, even in relationships. Sexual tension is fundamental for a relationship, a sexual relationship. But if you find yourself in an emotional situation and your face is reflecting that you are under stress when you don't need to be in stress because of the circumstances, 3 deep breaths at least, and on the exhale, consciously relax those muscles of the face that you felt that triggered with the circumstance. And that's already going to have an impact on all the system.
Oh, thank you so much for that, Adaji. So inhale, and with every exhale, imagine that you're releasing that stress and tension in whichever part of the face that you're feeling it in, and using the three deep breaths to able to do that.
And
Thank.
because the inhale is going up, it's like belly, abdomen, uh, uh, chest, and then clavicles is going up. So at the moment that you are high, in the high place of your body is your face. So that's when you feel your face. And then on the exhale, as you exhale down, then the face releases the tension. That would be the full tip. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that, Adaji. I'm really going to try that myself.
There you
Um,
go.
and I think this might be a good place for us to thank everyone for joining us today.
Thank
And
you.
look forward to seeing you next Friday at 5:30 p.m. India time, and
It's 12 in Portugal. whatever you are, you have to calculate. Thank you, everyone. Thank you
Thank
for
you,
listening and
everyone, for
watching.
joining us.
Sanam.
Satnam.